Today we are talking about countering Baron Samedi. Now, Baron Samedi has been in the game for a while now, has received a lot of nerfs, but he's still a nuisance to many players and they struggle with playing against him. So let's talk about what we can do. We'll talk about counter building in terms of items, in terms of relics, then guards or counter picks to him in general and other strategies that guards can apply to counter him, then positioning and then other strategies. Let's begin with counter building. Now typically when it comes to counter building there are quite a few items that will counter a guard and then you have some relics on top of that. Whereas with Samedi the situation is a little bit different. There is a variety of different relics that are pretty strong against him, whereas the item side is a little bit smaller. If there's one item that really counters him, it's Pestilence. With a mix of health and defense as well as anti-heal, is everything you want against him. You want to reduce his healing and you want to survive his combo. However, that's not exactly the item that everyone wants. If you have to counter his burst specifically as a squishy, you can always consider going for Bulwark if necessary, because that way you can counter all of his burst damage specifically. But in most situations, the items that you would rather want are items like Broadlet Speedstick or Divine Ruin to simply lower his healing while not lowering your damage output at the same time. As a support, having Hardwood Amulet obviously helps a lot as well, increasing your team's magical protection. The same goes to some extent for Gauntlet of Thebes, though it's not quite as effective. Magi's Cloak is also an item that you can use. However, it is not quite as effective as against some other guards when it comes to their CC. And that is due to the fact that Baron Samedi's pull won't get interrupted by Magi's Cloak. The stun at the end will still not take place and you will instead pop the bubble basically, but it is kind of still a detriment in comparison to what some other relics offer. If you have Magi's Cloak and you have nothing else to get out of his ult, the best bet is probably to just run straight into the stun and take away the pain of the extra tick damage. Another item that is at least for support in this regard are Reinforced Greaves or Reinforced Shoes. Not only do they come with extra protections per tick, which is very useful against somebody who has multiple ticking abilities, but they also come with crowd control reduction, meaning he can't CC you quite as long. But that brings us to the more important part, and those are the relics. The first one that really stands out against Baron Samedi is Aegis. Aegis allows you to just run into his ult, take no damage and basically lock him in place due to the animation of his ultimate when he stuns someone while being stunned yourself but not taking any damage. If you have Aegis, that's your best bet all of the time. You save your teammates or anyone else around and you don't take any of the ridiculous damage of his ultimate. Pop the Aegis, run into him, job done. If that's not an option, because sometimes you need to counter other guards on the team as well, Beats is still very good. With Purification Beats, you can easily get out of the ult if you time it right, meaning you want to use it as early as possible and run out of the ult straight away before he has stacked too much Hysteria on you and it's getting hard to get out. Or if you timed your beats a little bit too late, then you can also wait until you get pulled faster and shortly before you get pulled in all the way, you use your beats and then you often have a chance to run out as well, especially because the cone is smaller towards the end. But overall, you should always try to beat early and just get out right away. Technically speaking, Bracer would also be a counter in that regard, as a lot of Samedi's damage comes in a very short time frame between his ultimate and usually the rest of his combo, or the rest of his combo and then his ultimate. As such, if you can survive that, you can also use Bracer, but I would never recommend it over Aegis or Beats. I only mentioned this in case Bracer gets a buff in the near future. Shell and Meditation are obviously also options for any tank, just giving you a little bit more survivability. Especially Shell is nice because it can preemptively be popped in the ultimate. Cursed Ankh in its upgraded form technically counters Samedi as well, as you can kind of pop it right when he uses his 2 on you, and then you will be able to proc the effect of it on the enemies, them taking extra damage as the heal arrives on them shortly afterwards. The problem is that Cursed Ankh is often just not generally worth it as a relic, and with Samedi alone it's a bit too conditional. This is something I would only consider if there's a second healer on the team as well. Another nice option if you're tanky enough is Thorns. If he sucks you in, then he will just take an insane amount of damage himself. A relic that unfortunately does not work is Sprint. Even with Sprint you won't be able to run out of Samedi's ult, and as his 3 is now a ramp to root, it won't do anything to that either. So not worth considering. And that brings us to the guards. Samedi has quite a few direct counters as well as indirect counters, and guards is generally doing well against him. The first biggest obvious direct counter is Sobek. Not only can Sobek avoid his damage through the root with his dash, he can also reposition Samedi, and Samedi hates being repositioned as he doesn't have much mobility. Sobek has anti-heal against Samedi's self-heal, and Sobek can just go into his ult when Samedi ults and either just swim away because the duration is way longer, or he can choose to go into Samedi and pop the ultimate so that none of his teammates go in and won't even get stunned in the process. Everything about Sobek's kit is pretty much specifically against Samedi. Another very nice counter, if you're already talking about Guardians here, is Ymir. With Ymir, you can actually place your wall in front of Samedi's ult, and if he pulls you in, then you will stop on your own wall, and you can even save teammates that way. So as long as Ymir is nearby and he knows what to do, Samedi will never get anyone pulled. And speaking of walls, Odin is also a pretty nice counter. He doesn't have the same perk with the ultimate because Odin is not stopped by his own walls, but everything else kind of helps him here. He's got good burst against Samedi, he also has anti-heal when he puts him in the cage, and Samedi has no option at all to get out of Odin's cage. As such, always a beneficial situation. Two interesting counters are Chang'e and Raven, because they both can completely counter out the damage and the CC of the ultimate by simply running into it and using their 2, which will give them damage immunity and CC immunity, so they take neither, but it will still pop Samedi's ult, so he will get into his stunning animation and won't be able to do anything against it. Going back to the anti-heal guards, there's also Aquatic, who just works very well against immobile targets with self-heal, and Samedi is both, so Aquatic can basically punish him every time he uses his 2 and just get a lot of damage on him as well. Another counter that's also an immobile guard himself is Anubis. Anubis just does a lot more damage in his ult than Samedi does, and Samedi on the other hand is very immobile in his own ult. So when Samedi ults, you ult, and unless he's very ahead in terms of items and level, you will be able to just fry him with your ult for free and he can't avoid it. Another great counter, almost as great as Sobek, is Kabrakan. He's unfortunately just not as strong in the current meta. Kabrakan is able to immune the root from Samedi's 3 with his own 1 because it just makes him root immune, and he also is able to lock him down very well with a 3, and he can also prevent getting pulled in through his ultimate with the walls blocking off Samedi ult once again, though he sacrifices his ult in return for that. Generally speaking, a lot of guards with self-sustain, with high mobility or with anti-heal work well against him, as well as mages with long-range damage, like for example Agni as well. There are a few specific interactions that I didn't want to let go unmentioned. Einher's Pillar can actually block you from getting pulled as well if you place it right. Ideally place it right in front of Samedi, that makes it really hard for him to pull you, but even if you place it just in the middle of the pull somewhere, you should normally be fine. With the Thor wall, this doesn't work, but if you're an ally and you're next to the ult somewhere, as Thor, you can still wall off Samedi from whoever he's pulling, and then the wall will actually block off your ally. It just doesn't work for yourself. With Morrigan, you can do something similar. If you're coming from the side, you can send your decoy in right in front of Samedi, and it will actually soak up his ult. However, you have to place it very properly, because if you don't, then the decoy will die to an earlier tick of the ability instead of the actual ultimate proc with a stun, and then you effectively don't get anything out of it and his ult keeps on going. Same works with Sun Wukong decoy. Here it's obviously a little bit easier as he will pull it in and it won't get destroyed in a single tick of damage. CC immune ults can always be used if you're willing to take the damage as well, if you just want to avoid the stun. For example, a Mercury ult or Amaterasu ult will deal damage to him, will make you take damage in return, but will prevent the stun from hitting you. And obviously Capri ult can help your teammates as well, and Samedi has a very hard time not killing them in the process unless he's very quick cancelling everything or turning away. A fun fact also on the side, Virus Cyclopses on Reddit pointed this out, Artemis Trap stops pulls, so if you see an enemy Artemis Trap somewhere on the ground, you can actually try and run into it while getting pulled and you will get rooted instead. As for your positioning, just don't be closer to Samedi than necessary in any given moment. Do not stand close to his tower, or he will just ult you into it, similar to a Sobek plug basically, or a Tyr pushing you in or Herc pulling you in. You should be very aware of this. And his cooldown is usually very low because he typically builds cooldown reduction, so he probably, even if you have a CC immune ult, will pull you in more often than your ult is up. Do not engage if you have a lot of Hysteria on you, because it gives him a ton of extra benefits that he shouldn't be having. Also, do not stand too close to teammates with a lot of Hysteria on them, because then you may get a root through them as well, which you really don't want because there's no benefit in it. In terms of strategies, the best strategies against Samedi, outside of what we already talked about here, are ganking him very frequently because he doesn't have that much mobility and is very vulnerable to ganks, as well as running into the Baron ult to soak it up for your team if there's no other option, because that means that it will tick less and deals less damage overall and procs less Hysteria. Taking the extra ticks and also maybe stacking something like a Spear of the Magus is absolutely unnecessary, it just makes you weaker. Warding wise, there is nothing specific that has to be paid attention to against Samedi compared to other guards. And that's it for this guide to deal with Samedi. I hope this makes things a little bit easier for you here and there. If you are interested in more information about Samedi and you'd like to play him yourself, Teets has also made a how to play Samedi guide, which I will link right here. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and ring the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.